Yeah, so thanks for being with me today. Just want to talk about things relating to the Montclair Orchestra. So maybe we could start with each of you just saying a brief word to introduce yourself.
Sure. Okay. My name is Dov Scheindlin. I'm a violist, and I've been playing principal viola of the Montclair Orchestra since the very first concert that we ever did in 2017. And it's been amazing to watch this grow, to enjoy collaborations with my professional colleagues and also with students. And I really cherished it as an event that I always look forward to.
And what do you do in your non-Montclair professional life?
Oh, when I'm not playing in Montclair, I'm a violist. I'm a member of Orpheus, and I'm an associate member of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, and I play whatever other chamber music happens, and summer festivals, of course, and I'm also a father of two, and I'm becoming a very good chef. I mean, I'm getting a lot of practice running a restaurant. So during this COVID time.
Sounds good. Devin Moore, hello.
Hi.
Hi, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name's Devin. I am currently a viola studying at Juilliard. I'm just finishing out my junior year. And I started on the violin when I was younger, and I sort of picked up the viola a little bit later when I was like a junior, senior in high school. I started studying, and then, I immediately fell in love with it. So that's what I decided to audition with. And I started at the Manhattan School of Music. And then just this past year, I transferred to Juilliard. So I'm still a newbie at Juilliard, but I'm really enjoying it so far. And in terms of Montclair, I've been involved with the orchestra now for the past 2 seasons. I came in a little bit, I think the second or third concert of last year's season. So I've gotten to do about, I think 5 or 6 concerts. So it's been really great getting to participate in the orchestra.
Well, it's been great having you, and you as well, Dove, of course. Rely on your leadership a lot. And one reason why I'm talking to the two of you today is, of course, in Montclair, we have this unique system of having professional mentors and student fellows play alongside each other. And so I want to talk a little bit about that relationship. One reason why this is a new kind of video series of interviews we're doing of this sort. And we decided to start with the two of you because A, you play the same instrument, and B, because Devin actually arrived as a recommendation on Dove's part. So let's talk about that for a moment, Dove. How did you first become aware of Devin's presence at Amsterdam?
I first heard Devin play a few years ago at the Manhattan School of Music Concerto Competition. I was a judge for the competition, and I was very impressed with Devin's playing, and I think he actually won the competition. I thought of him as someone who played with an artistry that I felt very at home with, and that, I saw, of course, he's a student. I can already see this in the musician in his playing, and I thought he was someone that I wanted to watch. And when there opportunities came up in Montclair for me to recommend people, he was someone I thought of right away.
From a professional mentor's standpoint, I mean, there definitely is a thing with identifying students who are kind of ready to benefit from the hands-on experience. And I mean, I guess we have student fellows who are at different stages of experience, needless to say, but what sort of qualities would you say they have in common that make them receptive to benefiting from this experience?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In Devin's case, there was an artistic sensibility about every note that he was playing. There was a sense of sound and a sense of engagement, and a sense that I knew that even though he was I think at the time, maybe first or second year undergraduate student, that there's a maturity in his playing that went way beyond age, the question of age. It's a question of, being aware of all the parameters of music, being engaged and involved, not just in the technical side, but in creating something. And that's what you're really looking for, I think. We talk about sort of student-y playing sometimes, and that's something that Devin would never do. I think it's a kind of playing that's sort of correct, but still unconfident about what you're trying to say. And I think what I loved about Devin's playing right away was that there was a sense of presence and a sense of artistic creation and engagement. And that's unusual, even in older students. So I would say with all of the fellows that we have, we try to find people who are students who are musically engaged, who are ready to benefit from a side-by-side collaboration with a mentor, where I know that I may be the mentor now and Devin's the student, but we will be colleagues, and I feel it already that we're colleagues. That I can learn from him and he can learn from me, and that we have things to share. That he's engaged on that level in spite of his youth.
That's great to hear. Devin, from your perspective, how does playing in a group like Montclair, apart from the obvious, but tell us in specifics, how does it make this different than playing in your regular student orchestra experience, say at Juilliard, which is of course very good, very, very good. But what is the difference in the experience, and how has it benefited you?
Yeah. There's something really unique about the orchestra, specifically with how it affects how I'm constantly actively thinking about my own playing, both on things that I wouldn't necessarily have done or thought about, that I could sort of, keep my eyes on the orchestra, see what the mentors are doing. And then also it sort of reaffirms some of those, some of the things that I may have wanted to try that end up I see everybody else doing, or breathing in a similar way, or attacking a note in a particular fashion. So it's also reaffirming. There's reaffirming aspect as well, to say that you are doing some things right, that your mentors and the professionals are doing them as well. It's also really interesting just to be in an environment where you are, even though there is that student mentor relationship, like you said, Dov, is the bridging of the gap in becoming a colleague. You start to, think of yourself independently as a musician outside of the institution that you may be a part of as a student. And you start to make decisions that, you bring with you into professional careers. So it's nice to have the duality of learning, but also having that affirmation that, you are making progress and making some of the right choices.
Absolutely. And I remember back to my own education when I was at Juilliard, and I craved those moments when a mentor would treat you as a colleague, or, realize that you were bringing something, and that you would be colleagues. The difference between you was not necessarily innate artistic ability, it was experience. And so I think of myself as Devin and I as colleagues. I may have had more years of experience, and I might have some things to share based on that. But, there's certainly something that brings a lot of confidence for a young player to play alongside a more senior musician as a colleague. It brings a different dimension of confidence that you don't get from lessons and coachings.
Yeah, I would even say from my vantage point on the podium, one thing I've learned in my years as an orchestral player myself is that the really great conductors are really listening to the orchestra and often following, even though they may appear to be leading. And it's as important from the podium as it is from any one chair to another. So it's very safe to say that although I may be standing there appearing to give direction, I'm also listening, adjusting, and yes, learning myself. So along those lines, Dov, might you say that in this situation, there are times when even the professional mentors are learning from their student counterparts?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we have a certain day-to-day way of doing things, from playing hundreds of nights a year, and we often learn in a great hurry. We draw on our memory and experience to play things at very short notice with very little rehearsal, and students who are actively, studying have a different way of analyzing what they're doing. They have the luxury perhaps of spending more time on each thing that they're learning. They bring a certain thoroughness and depth of preparation, and sometimes they may not perform as often, but the preparation is more thorough. And so it's absolutely refreshing to go back into that mindset, to share an experience, to bring sort of our facility together with their thoroughness. And sometimes I feel like my section is pulling me up by the bootstraps rather than the other way around. I mean, I may have experience in an area where I can analyze a problem in a way somebody hasn't thought of, but there's no substitute for the sort of, the deep engagement with the music that students often bring, and also the enthusiasm. It's wonderful to experience that. It helps me to feel like I'm learning each piece for the first time when I feel the enthusiasm of the students who are playing a piece for the first time. We recently played Mendelssohn's Scotch Symphony, which I've played many times, but it felt as fresh as ever because half the orchestra hadn't played it before, and was so enchanted by the power of this amazing music that I couldn't help but be awed by it, all over again. So,
well, as musicians, that's the experience we ideally want every time, right? Is to feel like that freshness.
Right.
Great, Devin. Let me pose to you another question. In some of our wind and brass instruments, we have a situation that's not as easy to duplicate in the strings, where it's a 1-to-1 ratio, and very often you'll have the teacher playing alongside their own student. And I've had some of these pro wind players say, this was just great because I've been trying to bang this idea into my student's head for many, many lessons, and it took just one rehearsal live with the Montclair Orchestra for them to say, okay, now I get it. Because in the classroom, you were just talking and I knew you were right. But the moment I heard my function in the context of the orchestra, it all made sense. Now, as a section string player, it's not exactly the same experience as a woodwind player, where their note in the chord is like the one and only of that note. But is there any sort of comparable kind of aha moments you've had playing in this orchestra that you might be able to share?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that I've realized playing in an orchestra with this amount of professional involvement is the understanding of a bigger picture in many ways, especially like, for instance, the sound in the room or the space that you're playing in, with a feeling of taking a little bit more time, or attacking, in increasing the crispness of your articulation to accommodate the space that you're playing in, is something that not as many students are sort of thinking about, because a lot of the times we're focused on what's right under our ear and perfecting those skills. But really thinking of the orchestra as a unit in a space is something that I experienced working with Montclair, and then I brought that into my own playing. And that, that goes into solo, chamber music, and orchestra, is really trying to analyze the space that you're in and be able to adjust the way that it sounds underneath your ear within your own section to be able to bring certain things out or pull them back. And so, it's created a multi-layered sort of understanding of the music, or it's initiated me to start engaging in that kind of thought process.
Yeah, I love what you just said. If I can just jump in, I think what you said just now about the difference between playing under your ear and projecting is one of the big areas of confidence that separates students from professional. I think that's one of the big leaps that students have to make, is to recognize, and even some professionals, is to realize that the impact of what they do has to be projected well beyond their sort of intimate environment. And students spend so much time practicing in a tiny practice room. I remember the cubicles of Juilliard, spent hours and hours there. And, everything, you'd feel like everything was so live, and then you'd go play it in your lesson and the teacher would say, oh, well, there's nothing happening. And you realize, I have to do this much more. I have to play out. I have to project to Rosisi. And, you learn what things work and what things don't in that process. But having ideas, having feelings is wonderful, but the skill of projecting them outward. I remember one coaching in particular with Bobby Mann, violinist of the Juilliard String Quartet at the time, and he, he would yell at the students, like, to try and wake them up. He said, like, you're a sleeping beauty. You're not doing anything. I don't feel anything. And I was like, I felt it so much when I was playing, but then I realized it wasn't coming out. It was coming out 2 inches ahead of me, and it had to go out all the way. Now you don't want to overdo it either. So professional experience is one of those things that helps you with develop that. And so that's, I think, a little bit what Devin was talking about. And I think it's, we're learning that in Montclair. We're adjusting to that all the time. And I think one of the great things about David as a conductor is he's encouraging the players to play out, to really express themselves while they're playing, and not just to fit into, an orchestral, not just be a brick in a wall, but to be an artist. And that perspective of being alive at the moment of production, eventually, even though it may seem like it's going to be a little unruly at first, eventually the different interpretations come alive and harmonize and make a much greater performance. And I think that's a great thing about David's conducting.
Well, thank you. When I was Devin's age, one of my favorite books was the Guarneri Quartet's book about string quartet playing. And I remember very clearly, I can't remember which quartet member, but I think it was Michael Tree saying that, the violist naturally, saying that the range of technique that's demanded in string quartet playing is so much wider than solo playing. It's not to say solo playing isn't more individually demanding, but the range of technique from the loudest louds to the softest softs is wider, and you might have to do it on a dime, whereas solo playing, you tend to do it in a way that's going to fit your soloistic needs. And I would say it's safe to say that in orchestra, that's magnified times 100. When you have like a true full orchestra tutti with all the brass blazing in their glory, I've never played so loud in anything solo or chamber. And then when you're accompanying the second movement of a piano concerto, I've never played so softly in my life. And
but to play that softly while keeping your playing alive is even more of a challenge. I think
it is.
A lot of orchestral musicians see pianissimo and go to sleep, but the trick is to have a sound that still is engaged and yet doesn't crowd out with volume. It's a very difficult technique. For myself, I have one thing to say, which is that I don't teach regularly. I know David, in addition to playing and teaching you and conducting, you also teach. I don't teach regularly. For me, it's a particularly fun to spend time alongside students. And I do mean alongside, not instructing, but collaborating with, learning and sharing. And, it's a cycle. I remember myself as a student, and I remember the kinds of support that I needed, and I try to provide that for another generation. And it's immensely satisfying.
That's great to hear. I mean, I actually view my move to the podium in a way as just continuing teaching, because I think what teaching and conducting have in common is you're trying to get some very highly accomplished and very talented people to do something they aren't already doing. You have to word it a little bit differently, on the podium. If you give off the impression that you're really didactic, that tends to not work to your advantage with the orchestra. But I think at its core, it's a little bit the same thing. You're trying to convince people to do something they haven't considered. And I think that is one of the great joys of making music in this setting. And it's always great having both of you. So thank you very much.